afternoon. I teach on faculty at a liberal arts university that has an embedded seminary, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about what the liberal arts and theological education have to do with people in prison. Now, the photos that you will see here today are our students who are incarcerated, and they're delighted to contribute today through their images and through their educational journeys that mark a new chapter in the history of liberal arts, a history that begins like this. Once upon a time, before the rise of the medieval university, the liberal arts were born into a world divided by the free and the servile. Those who were free studied math, philosophy, art, and language in order to become an elite citizen. Those who were servile took up the trades so that they could contribute to the skilled labor force. Now, the servile arts were considered unbecoming of free persons because they trained people to tend to society's most base needs. The liberal arts, on the other hand, educated people for active, informed citizenship by problem solving and fostering empathy toward others and the ability to solve life's most complex problems. As time went on, these modes of educational distinctions persisted into the modern and the postmodern era, and we continue to distinguish between universities, who educate people broadly in the liberal arts, and community colleges, who tend to focus on particular vocations. Despite these ancient classist categories, the liberal arts have, in many ways, expanded their purposes. They still form people for wise and virtuous living, and yet many liberal arts institutions, like my own, see learning in itself as true and good and just. In a beautiful piece of writing called The Idea of the University, Cardinal John Henry Newman describes the liberal arts as various disciplines coming together to talk to each other and to form a whole that draws in a community of learners. This kind of interdisciplinary and communal learning, he says, fosters a classroom that cultivates overtures of reconciliation, hospitality to strangeness, and the opening of the intellect, followed by a responsive feeling in the heart. The good news about liberal arts today is that actual access to it has grown. The bad news is that it has not grown enough. If we truly believe the liberal arts are a transformative pathway that opens students' minds and hearts to new worlds and creative ideas, then we must make it accessible not only to those who are free, but perhaps most especially to those who are not free. Most of you probably know that the US is the leading incarcerator in the world. We currently lock up approximately 2.3 million men and women. You may also know that those who are incarcerated are disproportionately people of color, come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, were either unemployed or in a low-skilled job at the time of arrest, and they are less educated than the free population. What you may not know is that education in prison has been a proven effective tool to help those inside build meaningful lives while they're in prison and upon reentry. And further, about 40% of those who are incarcerated or more are eligible for college classes. The sad reality is that the number of higher education programs in prison has plummeted from about 350 in 1982 to just 12 in 2005. We need liberal arts in prison. I could try to convince you of this with studies that show that college in prison is good for everyone, and many are out there. Or I could try to convince you of this with stats, such as the state saves $5 for every dollar put into education in prison. Or I could convince you with the facts that college in prison improves public safety, it strengthens the economy by creating a stronger workforce, and it reduces the chances of recidivism by 40 to 50%. This is huge. And these studies and stats are quite convincing, but they're not at the heart of what I want you to walk away with today. Instead, I stand on the liberal educator's conviction that learning in its own right is true and good and just. And I invite you all into my classroom of free and incarcerated students to get a glimpse of the power of education inside. First, a bit about my own journey to prison. My area of expertise is theology and Christian social ethics. And when I started my graduate studies, my doctor father approached me and he said, Christian social ethicists have the unpleasant task of studying how people sin in groups. He really said that to me. Fair warning aside, I didn't go into Christian ethics because I was interested in analyzing society's worst faults or researching why people groups harm one another. To the contrary, I was interested in facing our deepest social ills in order to advance the best that is humanity, human flourishing, participation in civic life, and justice that is liberating for all, and most especially those on the margins. After 14 years of teaching social ethics in an urban context, where the topics that we studied, such as racism, poverty, educational disparities, affected the real people in our community, I decided that I wanted to do more than just educate about truth and goodness and justice. I wanted education to be good and true and just. And so I spent my sabbatical preparing to go to prison and to teach and learn with those who are not only marginalized, they are isolated to the point of invisibility. My first experience inside was at Stateville Correctional Center, which is a maximum security prison outside of Chicago. A friend of mine named Will had invited me to his class on the Old Testament and violence against women. And as I listened to the students present their projects and incorporate their own life's journeys into the themes of the course, two things happened. First, I saw that students who are incarcerated not only have a great interest in learning, they also have much to teach the free world. One of the students said that the tools that he had gotten from this class helped him to reflect back on his own life and to examine the ways that he had both contributed to violence and been a victim of violence. Another student said that he had enrolled in as many restorative justice and violence prevention courses because he believed the classroom was a place where the prison culture could be transformed and where he could form collaborative relationships with free people. The second thing that happened was that I saw the liberating power of learning on a whole new level. Clearly, the classroom in prison was a space where these men claimed their humanity back from a set of social ills that had stripped away their dignity for most of their lives. The very good outcomes of educational programs aside, the classroom in prison is a liberating space simply by existing. When the senior chaplain asked me to come in and teach a class, I thought, North Park needs to do more than just send me in. We need to bring in other faculty, students, administrators, even trustee members to participate in this classroom that had the capacity to bring together various people groups to talk to each other and to form a whole that draws in a community of learners. Imagine this classroom with me. You have 15 incarcerated students sitting in a circle, intermixed with 10 free students. There are no windows in here, and the fans that you see in the photos are as loud as they look. For 3 hours straight, there are no cell phones, no computers, nothing to eat, nothing to drink. Just books, pens, paper, a chalkboard, words, people. There's no need for long lectures because the students come having prepared, reading essay by those who are incarcerated, theologians, activists, pastors, lawyers, and even family members of those who are incarcerated. The hope is that each student will find at least one connection in the scholarly voice, and together, free and incarcerated students address the painful realities that lead to incarceration in the first place. Realities that we all contribute to. I had one of my more difficult moments as a teacher inside. I had a student whom I'll call James. James took me to task for one of the readings that I had chosen on the private prison industry. Professor Michelle, he said, I am really angry. Why did you subject us to this material? I don't want to read about the billions of dollars that private prisons make off of incarcerating people like me. I was so angry this week, I didn't want to see my family, and I almost didn't come back to class. I was stunned because I'm not used to students talking to me so directly and critiquing my pedagogical decisions in front of the whole class. And after I got over myself, I was really disappointed and sad. I had a pit in my stomach that I had caused one of my students pain. I wondered, what was I thinking? Is the privilege of being able to read about private prisons overshadowing the painful reality of those who live in it? Is it too much to ask incarcerated students to learn more about the social and economic injustices that surround mass incarceration in the US? And as I reflected and the students continued to talk, I saw that while we were learning more about the prison and its context in the US, something more important was happening. The opening of the intellect, followed by a responsive feeling in the heart. We were responding to what we were learning: anger, disappointment, disgust, and also collegiality, empathy, and care. Never again would my free students think about the issue of mass incarceration without seeing the faces and knowing the stories of the men in this classroom. Toward the end of class, I said, "James, thank you for speaking up to an authority. You demonstrated great courage today and even freedom. You modeled constructive criticism and you showed us that we can have difficult conversations in this class. And I also want you to know that as an educator, I could not, in good conscience, keep material like this from you. You are strong enough to learn about topics that affect you personally, and this learning community is strong enough to enter that world with you." A semester later, James continues to come to class, and he continues to boldly critique anything that is less than true and good and just. This is the best of liberal arts. It's the best of theological education, and it's the best of humanity. These kinds of humanizing events don't happen because we free people come in and humanize the students who are incarcerated. They happen because those who are incarcerated claim their humanity on their own terms, and in doing so, they create a classroom where these embodied claims reach ears in the free world. Those who are used to being heard learn to listen. Those used to being muted speak. And when they can't use their words, they find other creative ways to do it. I had another student, he loved music. I'm going to call him Thomas, after Thomas Dorsey, the father of Black gospel music. Thomas wanted to learn how to play the piano, but he only had access to one for an hour a week. And so he cut out cardboard keys and laid them in his cell and practiced in his head and with his fingers day in and day out, so when the choir needed a piano player, he'd be ready to go. Well, eventually a choir began to be formed and Thomas hit the ground running. He became the pianist and the director of the Stateville Gospel Choir. When I told him that North Park had a gospel choir, Thomas organized a joint concert. He said to us, "We believe that our music is a way to sing for equality and freedom, not just for Black communities, not just for people who are incarcerated, but for oppressed people all over the world. Even though our voices are muted," he said, "we believe we can be heard through our music." Thomas has since transferred to another correctional center where he started up another gospel choir, but he has a legacy at Stateville and at North Park. Every spring and fall, the joint musicians come together in one voice to sing in the context that the history of Black gospel music speaks into. And when the free students come back home to the campus, they become our best advocates, making our campus a hospitable place for students with records. Prison is a liminal space that has the capacity to both hide and reveal those bodies most knowledgeable of and affected by intersecting social problems. Muted voices not only come to the fore in class, they are our primary sources, teaching us about how these social problems intersect, and more importantly, how to care for the millions of people so tragically affected by them. You truly see in this space an inching toward overtures of reconciliation, hospitality to strangeness, the opening of the intellect, followed by a responsive feeling in the heart. When I watch these students teach and learn from each other every week in this very transformative but painful context, I'm reminded of one of the greatest advocates of the liberal arts, Cicero. Cicero was an ancient Roman philosopher and politician, among other things, and he had a daughter named Tullia, whom he loved. Tullia tragically fell ill after giving birth to a son, leaving Cicero to mourn what he said was the one thing that bound him to life. He isolated himself off from society, went into a deep depression, and made books and writing his temporary solace. In his letters to his friend Atticus, Cicero wrote that writing about such complex topics as grief and loss gave him just a little bit of respite and also enabled him to grow in mind and in spirit. Despite Cicero's isolation from society, he made his time of mourning the one thing that bound him to life his most productive period, creating works that would later become foundational to the Renaissance curriculum. Many people attribute Cicero's rich, imaginative life and his strength in the midst of great turmoil to his robust liberal arts education. I also attribute these to the ear that he had in his friend Atticus. Of the great potential that is the liberal arts classroom, Cardinal Newman also said this: "The general principles of any study you may learn from reading books at home, but the detail, the tone, the air, the color, the life that makes education live in us, these you must catch from those in whom it lives already." When I say education integrates lives and liberates minds, I'm not saying that the freed imagination is enough to overcome the suffering of incarcerated bodies. It's not. I'm saying that when muted voices reach ears in the free world and are able to critically engage and empathize and contribute to solving life's most complex problems, that is when truth becomes good, by integrating and bringing together lives that were previously isolated. And that is also how the slow work of liberal arts can deal with the brokenness that is mass incarceration. Many people call prisons schools for criminals. Let's make them more than that. Schools where people can come together and be freed by education, not only to face society's deepest social ills and to advance the very best that is humanity, but because the integrated liberal arts classroom is a liberating space that is true and good and just simply by existing. Thank you.